President Zelensky tweeted this afternoon a statement which was fairly emollient towards the American administration. We've had no reply from Donald Trump yet, but of course he's making a State of the Union speech about 2 a.m. our time. So it'll be interesting to see what reaction he has to that, if any. I assume there will be a reaction. He's given a big reaction, apparently, to Justin Trudeau's comments today on the imposition of tariffs. I think he's threatened to increase the tariffs on the basis that Justin Trudeau called the move dumb. Thin skin or what? But in this hour, I want to talk about J.D. Vance, because J.D. Vance was a bit of an unknown quantity to most of us when he became vice president. He'd written a well-received book, and one or two British politicians apparently knew him quite well. George Osborne, I think, had got to know him well. Kemi Badenoch knows him, and she's given him a bit of a free pass today, something I think is a bit of a mistake. A free pass on what, you may say? Well, let's just hear.
If you want real security guarantees, if you want to actually ensure that Vladimir Putin does not invade Ukraine again, the very best security guarantee is to give Americans economic upside in the future of Ukraine. That is a way better security guarantee than 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years.
20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 20 or 30 years. Or was it 30 or 40 years? He can only have been referring to Britain or France there. He later denied that. He said, I didn't even mention the UK or France in the clip, both of whom have fought bravely alongside the US over the last 20 years and beyond. Well, I don't know who else he was talking about then, because Britain and France are the only two countries that have actually formally said that they would provide peacekeeping troops. Now, as you can imagine, those comments have gone down like a cup of cold sick among the military and politicians in this country. Almost unanimously have condemned it, apart from Kemi Badenoch, who says, well, he didn't really say that, did he? And that's been the reaction on social media, where I was, should we say, quite critical of J.D. Vance earlier, and they were saying, well, he never mentioned us. Well, he can only have been referring to Britain and France. Now, how insulting is that? And if he wasn't referring to Britain and France, I mean, let's give him the benefit of the doubt for a second. Let's say he was referring to Denmark or Holland or Belgium. Now, if my memory serves me correctly, all of those countries sent troops to fight with NATO in Afghanistan. So virtually every member of NATO has had military involvement over the last 20 or 30 years. And if you want to draw up a list of the military involvement this country has had, you can add Iraq to it. We were America's main ally in the war in Iraq. And yeah, you can say, well, that didn't go very well, did it? But you look at, we had troops on the ground in the Balkans. There was the Falklands War. I mean, admittedly, that was a little bit over his time period. But it's grossly insulting to any NATO country to say that basically they're not up to it. Their military isn't up to it. Well, how would he know? People say, oh, well, he's fought in the military. No, he hasn't. He was in the Marines, but he was a photographer. He never saw any battle. He was a photographer in the Marine Journalism Corps, apparently, so I read. So I want to get your reaction to his comments and what you think they indicate maybe in the long term for our relationship with America and America's relationship with NATO. There's even rumours today that President Trump, in his State of the Union speech, might announce that America's going to withdraw from NATO. Now, I don't believe that, but even when rumours are going around like that, you start to think, well, if it doesn't happen today, it could happen in a month or 2 months or 6 months. Well, Simon Marks is LBC's US correspondent. He joins us live from Washington. Another day, Simon. I don't know how you cope with it.
I'm doing the best I can, Ian. Look, I mean, it's absolutely apparent that he was referring to the UK and France. There is no other possible construction you can place on those comments by J.D. Vance. And I think it's also really important to understand the context in which they were made. First of all, he was sitting down for an interview with Sean Hannity, the big primetime host on the Fox News channel, a programme absolutely, definitely watched on a nightly basis by President Donald Trump. That interview, from J.D. Vance's perspective, was being given largely for the benefit of an audience of one, namely the President of the United States. This is a vice president who has been absolutely eclipsed since Inauguration Day, January the 20th, by the de facto prime minister of this country, Elon Musk. And so he has become a vice president who has no real consistent ideology in his background. He's been very fluid in terms of what he has to say about things over the last several years. This is a vice president who has now repeatedly decided to double down in a bid to show to Donald Trump that he's the guy. He's got the stones, absolutely, to say all the outrageous far-right things that Donald Trump will say, so that if anything happens to Donald Trump, he's safe being a heartbeat away from the presidency. It started with the Munich Security Conference speech, which did not simply unsettle European leaders, as the New York Times here told American readers. It absolutely enraged them by J.D. Vance asserting that democracy and freedom of speech were backsliding in Europe at the very moment when democracy and freedom of speech are demonstrably backsliding here in the United States. Then, of course, Vance was certainly as outrageous in his behaviour towards Volodymyr Zelensky as Donald Trump was last Friday in the Oval Office, and arguably was the instigator in the mugging of Volodymyr Zelensky. Again, that appeared designed to secure Donald Trump's attention, and I think that this interview with Sean Hannity did that as well. The other point I would make, Ian, is that, you know, what he had to say about British and French troops was appalling enough, but it was also what he said immediately before that that was so revealing. He said that the best way to stop Vladimir Putin and provide real security guarantees in Ukraine is to give Americans economic upside in Ukraine, and that is code for get Zelensky to sign the minerals deal so we can extort Ukraine's minerals wealth while we continue making the entirely false premise that the United States is owed $350 billion by the Ukrainians, because that dramatically overstates the amount of aid that the United States has provided to Ukraine. And it also means we're absolutely not interested at all in providing the military security guarantees that Zelensky is demanding, and also those random troops from Britain and France, their commanding officers are also demanding.
And just a word about the State of the Union address. Is there any briefing about what Donald Trump might be saying in that?
Yes, I have to correct you. It's not a State of the Union address.
I thought it was.
A trivia buff like yourself, Ian, will appreciate this. It is a speech to a joint session of Congress. It's only a State of the Union address, for reasons I've never fully understood, in the second, third and fourth year of any presidential administration. The first one is just a speech to a joint session of Congress, and on the day in which the stock markets here have tanked and prices have started going up because of Donald Trump's trade war, we think he's going to tell Americans that a little bit of short-term pain is worth tolerating in order to bring about the crackdown on illegal immigration and fentanyl imports into the United States illegally that he promised Americans on the campaign trail during the presidential election. So he's certainly going to double down, I think, on the trade war, at least over the short term, as he's done on social media again over the last few hours. As for what he says about Ukraine, what he says about Russia, what, if anything, he says about NATO, I mean, as with everything that we've seen since January the 20th, it is anyone's guess. We could be talking about literally anything tomorrow. None of it, I suspect, will obtain to a warming of relations between the United States and its transatlantic allies.
Now, Simon, I need your insight here, because James says, I have to ask Ian, do you regret shilling for Trump during his campaign? Now, you and I talked many times during that campaign. Do you recall who I said I would be voting for if I was an American?
I'm pretty certain, Ian, that it wasn't Donald Trump, that you had stopped shilling for Donald Trump long before the 2024 presidential election was ever in our mind's eye.
I never shill for Donald Trump because right from
Never
the start
shilled
of his first campaign, I said I'd never vote for him in a month of Sundays. I made very clear that I would be supporting Kamala Harris if I had a vote. So, Jason, I don't know where you've got that from. I don't know which other presenter you think I am, but it's not me, mate.